And welcome. And we'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
All right. So basically, I wanted to share a little something. So I was doing some more thinking about this parsha, and based on what we had done last year and some of the thoughts that in the discussion that came up, that if you really try to take this absolutely literally, how is it possible for Noah to take every species of every kind of animal on board the ark? I mean, it would, assuming that he could even, it says the animals came to him, but so let's assume every animal did. But if every animal of every species came, it would be totally impossible to do this. And so I'm forced to think that the Torah itself understands this, and that again the Torah is speaking to us about spiritual issues and the relationship that we have to this world. In terms of the animals, what is our responsibility and the unique position that human beings have as to the survival of the animals or their destruction? That is what the story is really about, and that in that regard, as I try to meditate about what it is to believe in God, and recognizing that saying the term I believe in God is actually a major shorthand of a whole bunch of other things that actually are involved in that particular place to be. That it has to do with a recognition or an attempt to study and to recognize and to struggle with our place in the universe. That here we are, so insignificant on the one hand, when you think of the very planet Earth as a tiniest dot in the entire universe, almost to the point of complete insignificance. And yet, each one of us, has a role to play as to how we choose to see our place in this universe, and understanding that there is so much around us and beyond us and beyond us, and that is what's involved here, and that in coming to a sense of what that is, we recognize the impact that we have as individuals on the environment around us, and in this particular regard, the animal life that sustains us, of course, that in turn sustains us and makes our lives possible. And that in a sense, certainly this part of Noah and his family has to do with the relationship that we have to the animal life of this world. So I don't know if any of you want to react to that, but that was a meditation that I got into as I sort of tried to reflect on the big picture and what this parsha is trying to tell us. So I'm happy to, if you have any comments, I'd be happy to hear them at this point. Otherwise, we'll dig into the text. All right, I will let you. Yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi, what happened to the 10 generations? They didn't say anything about the 10 generations until Noah. What
Yeah.
happened then? All those generations, I don't know.
Good point. So again, meditating on that essential. Okay, so if you ask yourself scientifically, what is the purpose of human life? Is the purpose of human life basically procreation? That just, that essentially the purpose is to procreate and to survive. And perhaps you can live life that way. And perhaps the irony of those 10 generations that live for such a long time, right? We have most of them living in excess of 900 years, and yet there's nothing. They leave nothing. And is the Torah trying to tell us that it's not about length of years? It isn't. We aren't here for ourselves so much. We really are here to serve and to find joy in that service of the one who created us. And of course, Noah does respond to that. And in the meantime, the rest of humanity is on a different vector, basically a self-serving vector, and accomplishes nothing. And so essentially, the Torah is again wrestling with the issue of what is life about? What are we really here? I mean, it's clearly a very, very deep book. And if in fact I am, correctly understanding and correctly interpreting what the Torah is trying to tell us, it gets into a place to really add to the value of our own lives and to help us examine those lives and see what we are actually accomplishing, given the amount of time we have. And regardless of whether you have over 900 years or the average lifespan, which let's say is between 70 and 80 years, it has to do with how you fill each and every day. How does each one of those stack up in terms of our service? So I think that's possibly a takeaway from reading about these 10 generations that basically didn't accomplish anything that was perhaps worth mentioning in the Torah. There are a few places where something is mentioned. So, for example, we have Enoch, who walked with God, but what exactly that meant, we don't know. We'd have to trust the commentaries to understand that. But by and large, we see that the world is so narcissistic, essentially, and that it's not worth keeping, that God sort of regrets having made the world, is the way the Torah describes it.
Did Enoch have Noah? Was
Say
that
that
his
again.
child?
Say that
Was
again.
Noah Enoch's child?
I can't hear I can't hear your question, Harlan. Was Noah what?
I was wondering if Enoch was Noah's child. Noah was Enoch's child.
I don't think so. I think his
And
father.
before, didn't he come before Noah?
Yes, he did. Enoch came before Noah. He did. I actually think that if I'm trying to think, forgive my poor memory.
I've got
Is it
it right
Lamech?
here in
Is
front
it
of me.
Noah's father, Lamech?
Noah's father is Lamech.
Yeah, that's kind of what I remember, but
And then
not quite
back
sure
from
on
that is
Yeah,
Methuselah, and back from that is Enoch. So
right,
great, whatever, or great.
right. And by the way, Methuselah dies when the flood occurs. Methuselah doesn't. I think these people actually are not considered to be empty people according to the tradition. So I think that there's some commentary as to, the coincidence of the flood happening, the year that Methuselah dies. And what my recollection is telling me something to the effect of that God didn't want Methuselah to have to see what was happening to the world. All right, let's.
I got one more question.
Sure.
If God said, I'm going to destroy the world with water, Noah, who was a righteous man at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody was fighting with everybody, but Noah wasn't, and he was with God. Why didn't God say, well, all right, you don't have to do an ark. I can supernaturally take you and your family and destroy the world, and you won't have to have an ark. Why would he have to have an ark? Unless God said, I want you to do yourself this ark like I did in Egypt when I released the Egyptians. They had to fight for Pharaoh. He wanted them to know that they have to self-do themselves. I don't know.
So, Harlan, you're asking a question that Rashi actually asks. So it's really cool that you're zeroing in on the very issue, that one of the issues that Rashi himself raises from the tradition, and says exactly the same question poses exactly the same question in slightly different words, but basically he's asking the same question. And the answer that Rashi gives is that that God wanted Noah to go to the trouble of building the ark so that people would say to him, "What are you doing?" And he would tell them why he was doing. He would warn them that God was going to destroy the world, and in the hopes that they might, in fact, do tshuva. Look, do you think God really wanted to destroy God's creation? I don't think so. And in some ways, that's sort of a message to all of us, that God is a God of justice, but it doesn't mean that it's a pleasure for God to administer justice in the sense of having to destroy and kill and wipe out humanity or human beings. And so it's as if God waits patiently to see if there's any chance of us changing, any chance of us doing tshuva. So that's why Noah was asked. That's the answer that Rashi gives as to why Noah had to go to all the trouble of building the ark with his family. So that's the answer to your question.
Yes, yes.
All right. All right. So we are actually probably going back a little bit here, but regardless, it seems like a good place to start. Vayomer Hashem leNoach. So Hashem said to Noach, Bo ata v'chol beitcha el hateva. You and your entire household come to the ark. Ki otcha ra'iti tzadik lefanai. For you I see or I saw as righteous lefanai, before me, bador hazeh, in this generation. So this is Rashi on this. Ra'iti tzadik. I see that you are righteous. Velo ne'emar tzadik tamim. And we notice Rashi points out it doesn't say tzadik tamim. It just says, it doesn't mean wholly righteous or perfectly righteous. It just says righteous. Leaves out tamim, the word pure, perfectly. Mikan she'omrim, okay, shivcha. So there's a lovely tradition or a proverb or, practice. From this we derive she'omrim miktzat shivcho shel adam b'fanav, that we only say part of praise, of a person's praise, in his presence. In other words, because God was addressing Noah here, he doesn't talk about him as tzaddik tamim, but at the beginning of the parsha, where it's simply talking about Noah, not addressing Noah, it describes him as tzaddik tamim. So that when you praise a person to their face, you don't praise them completely. You leave out something. V'chulo, however, you praise a person entirely, shelo b'fanav, not in his presence. So that when you talk about someone behind their back, you should be praising them completely, but when you talk to a person directly, you don't. And I suppose, you can say to yourself, well, what's the reason for that? So I can think of two reasons. One is that if you do it, it can sound like overdoing it, at which point there's an issue of sincerity. That when you overdo something, then, you can question whether the whole thing is, in fact, valid. Okay, that's one reason. A second reason would be that it might be embarrassing. That it can be embarrassing. If someone has ever praised you, certainly publicly or whatever, and has gone overboard, it becomes embarrassing. And the third reason perhaps is, and I'm thinking of a third reason, right, is that you don't want to turn a person's ego. You don't want to sort of encourage a person to be vain. And there's a possibility that might happen, or that you make a person overconfident, etc., etc. So there are reasons why it's important to praise. It is very important to give encouragement and praise. And very often encouragement entails praise, but not to overdo it. Not to mention every single thing. So, continuing. Mikol habeima, from all the cattle, hatohora, which is pure, and this now introduces a whole category that I don't believe has been introduced up to this point. And that is the notion of pure cattle, pure animals, purity and impurity. That certain animals are considered pure, certain animals are not considered pure. Again, that's a category. And the fact that the Torah assumes, right, that Noah understands what this is, that at this point, either from the very beginning or at this particular point, there is some notion of creating a distinction, a unique kind of distinction between something that is pure and something that is not pure. At any rate, getting back into the pshat, God is telling Noah that from all those animals that are pure, cattle, tikach lecha shiv'a shiv'a, that you should take 7, right? That you should take shiv'a shiv'a, ish ve'ishto. That is literally man and his wife. So what it's talking about is male and female. All right? So does this mean 14 animals? Does it mean, well, it's hard to imagine, what that actually could mean other than that, all right? Or does it simply mean 7 animals? But if it does mean 7 animals, then there's going to be one that isn't paired. So we have to think that it's possibly that. There's also a possibility that Shiv'a may mean 14, although it makes more sense to see it as 7 males and 7 females. Umin habehema, and from the cattle asher lo tahora, which is not pure, which is interesting. It doesn't say which is impure, it says which isn't pure. And there's another principle that is derived from this. Shnayim, a pair, ish ve'ishto, just 2, male and female. Literally, again, a husband and his wife. Excuse me. Although it's interesting that I'm looking at the Onkelos here, and he says dachar uvenokba, or nakba. He says male and female. So he understands the Hebrew. He doesn't take it literally, but there is Hebrew for male and female, zachar unkeva, but he takes the ish ve'ishto and places it and interprets it immediately as male and female.
I can't understand what pure means and unpure on the animals. I mean,
Good. Okay. So let's take a look at the Rashi first, Harlan, and then we can see, right? Okay. So he says ha-tahora, the pure. Ha-atida lihiyot tahora. He says that which in the future would be considered pure le-Yisrael, to the Jewish people. Lamadnu. So we learn from this, we can derive from this. Shelamad Noach Torah, that Noah studied Torah. But the point is that the Torah is anticipating, right? So pure would be the animals that could be brought on the altar, Harlan. Essentially, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about pure animals. And certainly when we're talking about cattle, okay, we're talking about we're talking about bulls and cows and sheep and goats. That's what we're talking about. So I think it's important that it says behema, which is essentially domesticated animals, as opposed to chaya, which would refer to wild animals, because as a matter of fact, there are certain wild animals that are considered kosher, that are considered pure, but they would never be brought on the altar. and that is like the ungulates amongst the wild animals, which are essentially the various species of deer, which have cloven hoofs and chew the cud. So they are also pure, but they are treated differently. Even nowadays, of course, in terms of the laws of kashrut, they are treated differently from those animals, the cattle, sheep, and goats that could be brought on the altar and that were brought on the altar. Those are treated differently, especially in terms of how the blood is treated. And also there are birds, right? We are actually told in the Torah which birds are not pure. And so anything else, any other bird, any other species of bird would be considered pure. But it doesn't say that here. It says, and I think that's why the Torah uses specifically umin ha-behema and doesn't say umin ha-chaya. It just says min ha-behema, and that's another reason why Rashi is able to say that this is referring to the Jewish people, because they would be the ones who would be bringing these particular animals up on the altar eventually. So I hope I've answered your question. All right?
Yeah, yes.
All right. So Shiva, it's sort of lovely, I think, just going back 1 second, that Noah studied Torah. So, of course, that does raise an interesting issue, right? Because the Torah had not been given at that point. So, to the Jewish people, that happened quite a few generations later. And the idea then is that there was some sense of a Torah that people, or that certain people, were aware of. So, for example, there are references, this sounds totally anachronistic, about the yeshiva of Shem, right? Noah's son, Shem, that he had a yeshiva. On the other hand, the idea that people certainly were, we're reading here about people who clearly believed in God, believed in having a relationship with God, believed, I believe, in serving God. That's certainly what Noah was doing. And so this preceded even Abraham, so that there was sense of Torah in the world at this particular point. Shiva. So 7. So he says, this is interesting. Rashi says, Kedei sheyakriv mehem korban betzetor. So the reason why he had to bring 7 was so that he would be able to offer up from them an offering when he came out. Right? So, and it mentions later on that when Noah came out of the ark, he took from those animals, from those pure animals, animals to put on the altar as I imagine as a thanksgiving offering to God, as an expression of thanksgiving. So there we go. That's the reason why they had to be pure. They had pure, meaning they can be brought up on the altar. That's essentially what that's referring to. Let's see if there's any other Rashi here. Okay, so let's stop here, and I will place a little. Oh, so this is interesting. I'm looking ahead at the birds, which I mentioned. Right, I said it wasn't mentioned there, but it is going to be mentioned in a moment. So let me pop this in here, and we'll know where to start. With God's help, I have to say, tomorrow, because I couldn't have anticipated what happened last Friday. I'm going to stop the...
Did, Rabbi, did Noah warn the people that God was going to punish them? If he warned them, why didn't they, I would repent. If they repented, God would have not did the punishment then.
Okay, because if you look around you, people don't really love to be told they're doing wrong, okay? And then, of course, there's so many people who don't believe in the idea of God at all. They just simply don't believe it. And, even in today's world where we clearly see climate change, I don't think there's any doubt about that, and people are still denying it. There are people who are simply denying it, and that's the element of stubbornness, that we have to be able to overcome, to recognize and overcome. And I'm going to thank the people who have watched this recording, and I'm going to say farewell